Hello and welcome back to the Making Spirituality Real podcast. Today we're going to continue with our analysis of the Parashara Hora Shastra. Last time we were delving into chapter 3, but chapter 3 is so huge that we had to stop because the podcast has gotten very long, and we were covering the basic traits of planets and mostly the concept of a malefic and benefic, which is kind of different than what you would expect given the kind of astrology that goes around on social media. Some of the planetary traits were, surprising and not quite like what the astrology cliches would make you to believe. And if you want to tune into that, then watch the last episode of my podcast to find more information, because today we're continuing from that. But even if you came here first, you can just listen to this first and you will still learn a lot of things from it. And you can, go back to the previous episodes if you just happen to stumble upon this episode instead. So the last time we were talking about the whole benefic malefic thing, and we're talking about the significations of the planets, the grahas. And right now we are moving on to the next point of chapter 3, which talks about the role that given planets fulfill in the system, in the astrology system. Now, what does that mean? The book calls it the planetary cabinet, and I will quote you the paragraph. Of royal status are the sun and the moon, while Mars is the army chief. Prince apparent is Mercury. The ministerial planets are Jupiter and Venus. Saturn is a servant. Rahu and Ketu form the planetary army. So I find it to be very interesting that the way that they describe this situation kind of mirrors the way society used to be set up traditionally. Well, right now we kind of have a twisted, different version of that. But I think it still mirrors something that happens in our society or even in our daily interactions, or the way that our lives are set up, even within things like family circles. And it also shows that having certain nakshatras in your chart is going to predispose you to being in certain social situations, in certain positions, and it will naturally place you in certain circumstances relative to the planet in your chart, because you can have nakshatras, lunar mansions, ruled by a different planet, ruling your planets. And naturally the big three is going to be the one that's the most apparent and that's the most solid in its expression. But for example, you can have your Jupiter in either of the nakshatras, and that will mean that either of the castes is what brings you happiness and prosperity, right? For instance, let's say you have Jupiter in a Saturn-ruled sign or in a Saturn-ruled nakshatra. That means that you will be happy serving people because Saturn is a servant. What's also very interesting here is that Rahu and Ketu, which are the nodes of the moon, are the ones responsible for the planetary army. So they're more like streams of energy, streams of consciousness that we direct into our daily life. So it's kind of like whenever you make a decision operating from Rahu or Ketu, you send your army, your energy army, towards a certain goal or giving a certain task or energy. So that's very interesting. What's also very interesting is that Mars is the army chief, which means that technically any decisions that you make regarding where to send Rahu and Ketu should be made or are made in regards to your Mars. You should always make decisions relative to your nodes, having your Mars as the commander of them. And that makes sense because we should make decisions that come from our instincts in regards to the ideas and beliefs that we have, or otherwise we end up regretting it. So that is very accurate. What's also interesting is that only Sun and the Moon are of royal status. So having the Sun nakshatras or the Moon nakshatras will automatically put you in a position in life where you have more privilege. And that is totally true from my experience. The people that I have met who that have Sun or Moon nakshatras, they just come from more privileged family backgrounds. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't have any success. If you come from any other planetary backgrounds, especially in the 21st century where anyone can be successful, but it indicates more the kind of success where you're going to have to put an effort and time into it, while with the sun and the moon, it's something that you're just born into. For example, I don't have like a single sun nakshatra in my chart, although technically I do have sun in the first house, which should make it a big part of identity. And the only planet that I have in the moon nakshatra is Jupiter. So, you know, my big three don't really have that influence. My big three actually is two-thirds Saturn and one Jupiter, and it makes sense because my family does come from you know, a more humble background, and I had to work a lot to be able to improve my life, which is again a very Saturnian notion. And then it's funny that the prince apparent is Mercury, so it's like he's still inside the royal cabinet, but there's a degree of innocence, lack of responsibility, and certain lack of dignity and grace, I guess, certain lack of seniority, the difference between the prince and the king or the royal status. So there's still an element of privilege. Well, you know how it is with the army chief. The army chief has a position of leadership, has a position of status, but the army chief is always busy with some sort of a task and some sort of a responsibility. So here the Mars is going to be someone that's kind of like always going around doing something, even if they are from a privileged position. And then what's interesting is that Jupiter and Venus, the benefics, are the so-called ministerial planets. So they have a certain position of a certain duties to be given, but they are not really exactly in the of the royal court themselves. They're important, but they're kind of separated, which is very intriguing. Like they're like the independent advisors, right? So it's like they have maybe their own wing of the palace, which I guess is pretty comfortable for these planets, which is why also they're, you know, their benefics, they kind of mind their own business and do their own task when they're invited to do it. That sounds kind of cool. And it's very funny that out of all of these, only Saturn represents, you know, servants, the populace, I guess. Same as for the Rahu and Ketu, the nose. Because where does the army come from? The army is drafted from the populace, even if only the best survive in the army. Then this is what it is. So it kind of shows that most of society, you know, the ones who don't grow into certain roles, they either are servants for life or they form the army. So Saturn, Rahu, and Ketu, the nodes of the moon and Saturn, rule most of the populace, which is something I've said in my articles before. So it's very interesting. In a way, it's kind of hard to get into the position of Jupiter, Venus, and the Sun, Moon, Mercury, something you have to be born into. I guess with the army chief, Mars is something you can do. You can distinguish yourself as the army chief from the army. You know, although historically some of the army chiefs were actually they had to be of certain noble blood for this to work. So it's like once you're born a certain way, it's very hard to make your way up. You know, it kind of reminds me of this scene in Memoirs of a Geisha, where Memoirs of a Geisha is based on the life of a woman whose moon is in a Saturn ruled nakshatra, and at the end of the movie, spoiler, she finally joins with her love, and she says, for a man, a geisha can only be half a wife. So even though she's kind of married to the guy that she really loved, and like she ends up because this is based on the biography, so the real woman ends up having a kid with him, she feels like she's never really truly joining any status situations because of her inferiority of birth, that she can never really fully have the position and the dignity of a normal wife, even if she did, you know, evolve past her initial status considerably through hard work. However, what is very interesting is that in our times more than ever, we end up with people from humble beginnings really advancing their position, and I think it's because in the time we live in, which the Vedics like to call as Kali Yuga, they believe it actually to be a destructive age of chaos. But you know, every cycle in the universe is necessary, and if you incarnate, you know it was for a reason. This is a time when I think you can make better progress than ever, precisely through planets such as Saturn, Rahu, and Ketu, because no time was better for a person that was coming in born out of nowhere to be able to make their way in the world, which is also represented in fiction. But traditionally, according to this book, it's kind of like you were born into certain energies, and this is what you're gonna stay with, and this is what you die with. So social advancement traditionally wasn't really much of a thing according to this, but we live in times right now where people with Rahu, Saturn, and Ketu have, actually have a lot of power in our society. So it's very funny how the whole planetary cabinet thing, even though it's traditional, the order of it gets kind of reversed nowadays. It's kind of it has lost its traditional meaning, and in a way I feel like it's a good thing, because I just don't think it's fair for somebody who is born simply by the result of their parents' karmas into certain circumstances to not have any possibility of advancement. People should have the possibility to distinguish themselves with their character if they have it, or with their achievement, and if they really have the merit of soul, then they should be allowed to prosper. And if they have the willingness to learn certain things, they're befitting of those of royal status. They should have that opportunity. And again, how many those who are technically born of royal status are completely rotten and hurtful? There's kind of an injustice here that I think is socially acknowledged by now, and well, the world is changing into what I just said, and I think that's the reason actually why the world changed. I think over time, maybe historically, the qualities of the planets were somehow linked with a certain quality of character. That being born of royal status meant that you were a better person morally, and naturally being born of the servile caste meant that you had inclinations to be of lower character. But over time, the royalty has degenerated in its nature, while the potentially good character traits in the Saturnian individuals were coming to light, and especially since royals have been known to consort with servants for their own pleasure. So if you this way have an illegitimate child, like someone of half status, half blood, that's going to remain in their DNA. So I think it's just it's kind of a genetic lottery. You don't really always get a great person just because they're of royal status. You don't always get a bad person just because they happen to be born into underprivileged circumstances. So I think that it's good that these kind of things are evening out, that the merit of character is showing, and it's overpowering the situations that probably were very unfair in the past. What good is a king if he's abusive, right? Not at all. A king should be just and fair, and there should be an element of kindness. And if that is lucky, no wonder he ends up getting overthrown. Anyway, the next part we're going to cover is very interesting, because it's called planetary complexions, as in skin complexion. So I'm guessing if you're very dominant in one particular planet, your chart is going to be visible in your skin, which is supremely interesting. The sun is blood red. So if you have like a very strong sun in your big three, you should have like more like a reddish hue. The moon is tawny. Tawny means like light brown, like brownish orange, like slightly tan, like a very delicate skin color. I would say my skin is a little tawny, and the ruler of my ascendant is Jupiter in moon rule nakshatra. So if your moon is very very strong, this is just how it's going to be. Mars, who is not very tall. Okay, so apparently if you have like a strong Mars, you're going to be not very tall. Which is funny, because I have a Moon-Mars conjunction, and I am very tall for a woman, so like I'm almost like 5'10", so if not more. I'm guessing, but my Mars is debated in Cancer, so maybe that's why. But so apparently a strong Mars makes you not very tall. I guess it's an interesting piece of information. Mars also, like the sun is blood red, so Mars can make you slightly reddish in complexion. Mercury's hue is akin to that of green grass. Well, I don't think that we have seen green grass colored humans, but now we know where the UFOs come from. They come from planet Mercury, because they're all green, right? Jokes aside, I'm guessing that in a human skin you could produce what fashion experts like to call a cool-toned person. You know how in the fashion world there is the color theory that you should wear colors matching for you, and you can be either warm-toned or cool-toned. So I'm guessing if you're very mercurial, you're gonna have a cool-toned skin, according to fashion experts. Tawny, very jaded, and the dark are Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn in their order. So Jupiter, like moon, is tawny, as in lightly pale brownish. Saturn is dark skinned. So see, that's why, this is going to be kind of a difficult comment, but I think that's kind of why people historically used to oppress people of color, because the dark skin is ruled by Saturn. So that's why there was the instinct to put them in servile positions, which later was of course questioned, just like the question of unfairness of limiting someone to the social class they were born in is also changing. It's the same way with with gender and skin color, and fair and fairly so. Now Venus is variegated with I hope that I'm pronouncing this well, variegated or variegated?
Variegated.
Okay, variegated apparently. Never heard this word before. But variegated means just with variety. So apparently the nature of Venus is to have like different skin patches on you, like have an irregular skin condition, which is very interesting. So basically the kind of thing that maybe your cheeks have a slightly paler hue than your than the area around your T-zone or something, like, that there's a certain unevenness in skin, which is why I guess the necessity for Venus to use beauty products to cover that up. But it's interesting that they associate Venus with skin patches. I had a friend once who she was like very strongly Venusian, and she would always complain, "Oh, the color of my face is so uneven," and she would put on foundation and stuff. So I guess maybe the strong Venus will do that to you. Now the next paragraph talks about planetary deities, which associates them with certain elements. I'm not going to cover all of this because this is getting into naming your child according to the Vedic Indian culture and into the Hindu alphabet, which is not going to be interesting for you. This is very traditionalist, and I don't think that has much spiritual meaning. Basically, they believe that using certain vowels from Sanskrit is going to imbue the child with planetary energy. What we can see here that's interesting is that the planetary deity of fire is Agni. So Agni just means fire, right? And Varuna, which rules certain deities, as you'll see in a second, is ruled by water. So it's good to know the water is Varuna. What is interesting here, that what is being advised, is that if the child is born with certain planetary astrology deficiencies, it can be named with characters imbued with the power of a certain planet, and that should help cure the affliction of the zodiac. So it's kind of, you can see how the Hindus live, how they name their children very consciously. Anyway, these next paragraphs just contain a lot of information about Hindu naming that I think are not particularly relevant to spiritual development. Unlike, things like the planetary complexions that you can observe in your own life, you can see if your skin is, tawny, if you're ruled by Moon or Jupiter. And I'm guessing that, of course, because we're a mix of all these planets, this is the kind of skin color that you get. And you just get maybe if you're very dominant in one planet, you get, you're more reddish or more brownish or darker if you're ruled heavily by Saturn. The other interesting thing that we have here is the talk about the gender of the planets. Certain planets are assigned masculine gender, certain planets are assigned feminine gender. So Mercury and Saturn are neuters, as in they're genderless. Moon and Venus are feminine, while the Sun, Mars, and Jupiter are masculine planets. Honestly, that makes sense because regardless of the kind of body that your incarnation picked, some women are more masculine in nature, some women are more feminine. So I think it just makes perfect sense that the activation of certain planets is going to show you the traits of character of a person. Let's say that someone is very strong on Mercury or Saturn, then they're going to be more androgynous, or they're going to appear genderless, right? And then let's say that even if you're a man, you're strong in planets like Moon or Venus, you're going to have a more feminine side to you, right? Or if you're a woman ruled by Sun, Mars, or Jupiter, you're going to be more take charge and masculine in nature. So it just shows the propensity that a planet has towards action. The feminine action is more passive and receiving, while the masculine action is more forward-moving and conquering and giving, even if it just gives wisdom and protection like Jupiter. And meanwhile, I would say the Mercury and Saturn are more like business-like, they're more goal-oriented, and they're more task-oriented. Both Mercury and Saturn are task-oriented, so that, does not indicating gender nature because that has to be performed by people regardless of their gender. Like you don't need seduction to perform a task or to communicate something objective or to investigate something, which is what Mercury rules. There's also a paragraph about planetary castes. Jupiter and Venus are Brahmins. Brahmins is kind of like a priest caste. So basically their role, their ministerial role is kind of like ministerial priesthood. So it's like a spiritual exorcism to look for advice from Jupiter or Venus, which makes sense. The Sun is a royal planet, so the Sun actually is the royal planet, while the Moon and Mercury belong to the commercial community. Interesting. So the Sun as the king is the high roller, while the Moon, his wife, and the Sun, Mercury, are reduced to affairs of commerce. So basically probably means that you only come to the king for the most important pieces of advice. Meanwhile, for daily affairs, his wife and his son are the ones who deal with business. Then Saturn rules what is called the fourth caste, Shudras, which is the servants, the rest of people. Now there's the question of gunas. Sattvic planets are the luminaries in Jupiter. So Sun, Moon, and Jupiter are those that exist peacefully without desire for acquisition or need for destruction. They are just content with the bliss and harmony of life. Venus and Mercury are Rajasic, as in they're concerned with acquisition. Mars and Saturn are Tamasic, as in they're responsible for destruction, for cleaning and order, and maintaining order and ordering things around when they get messy. And there's a footnote here. Sattva, Rajas, and Tamasic natures of planets will have a say on the disposition of the native. Yes, we discussed it in the last episode that if you're more Tamasic, like ruled by Saturn or Mars, you are going to have a high propensity towards, being more strict in your consumption, trying to organize your affairs. For example, I am strong in both Saturn and Mars in my chart, and that is so true. Like, I'm just such a clean freak, and I kind of don't buy anything new unless the old things in the house or in the refrigerator are used up. Totally true. Meanwhile, being ruled by Venus and Mercury, being ruled by Rajas, you're going to be more fulfilled with desires and try to control your material reality by purchasing things or refining things or creating things. Meanwhile, if you're ruled by the Sun, the Moon, or Jupiter, you're just kind of going to be sitting there contented that you're alive, which I guess is the biggest blessing, right? Anyway, we have a real nugget for you in the next episode because we're going to deal with the list of the deities of lunar mentions, but that's going to be next time because this episode's already getting too long. And then we're going to move on to the description of consecutive planets, which is also going to take its time. But today we had a lot of general information about the castes and the nature of planets and their complexions and their just more general traits that you can see reflected in our human life. So it's very interesting to look at your chart from that perspective and see that the planets influence everything about you down to your occupation in life, down to your position in life, and your skin color. In a way, it really speaks strongly for the idea of predestination, and if you are able to transcend your circumstances being influenced heavily by Saturn, Ketu, or Rahu, it's only because we live in our times that offer that opportunity. So it's definitely, fascinating how that plays out. I think this is as good of a moment as any to interject and explain to you why I believe that the world is operating it is nowadays. It's something that history, at least recent history, teaches us. I wonder how that went in historical times that have been forgotten by us due to lack of data. But see, at the beginning, originally, just like the book claims, there must have been a certain purity in nature of royals. And there must have been a certain energetic purity in the nature of every member of society that made for this natural order that the book likes to cling to. But over time, difficult things have happened that have raised the level of social discontent. See, what this book doesn't tell you is that Saturn, even though he's from the servant class, is actually the son of the king. He is the son, S-O-N, of the sun, S-U-N. The sun is his father, and the son didn't like his son Saturn because, first of all, he was illegitimate because the king is allowed to philander as much as he wants, which again is unfair. And so Saturn, his child, his illegitimate child was born, and he cast him out to be a servant. And for that, Saturn hates his father, the sun, because he feels like he was treated unfairly, which he was, just because he was different. And that is, of course, a metaphor, but as a result, we can see how that works for us socially. And it makes me think of things like the French Revolution, where at a certain point historically, what was happening is that the servant class was around 90% of the population of France, and the top 10% were the ones holding all the. They were the ones eating the cookie, while the rest was the one slaving around to bake it. And the social discontent of the masses has grown so large, and because there are more of them, that they have basically overthrown the royalty. And that was in the 18th century. And this is a movement that has spread across all of Europe and then across the world into situations such as founding of the USA as a country, or some immigrants also coming up there to build Canada as a country. So anyway, right now the first world, especially the American continent, these are countries that are founded on the fact that the king has been overthrown. They are founded by the Saturn, Rahu, and Ketu principles. They are founded on the discontentment over the injustice. This is the world we live in, and I think that it is just a natural consequence of how the universe works. Because when someone endures abuse for too long and the abuse is unfair over time, the resentment accumulates, and when that involves many people or a social group, that group begins to rebel because no one can endure oppression forever, and no one in power who is corrupt will stay in that power forever. And I think that, again, this book shows us very well how far we've come from that point. It shows us the evolution of our society, but in reality it's a loop. Because what will happen is that right now we're in this period of turmoil, but from this period of turmoil, new allegiances will emerge over time. The quality of character will ultimately dominate, and from that quality of character, new royalty will emerge. And it will be peaceful for a time, but over generations, the royalty will become corrupt all over again. And those who are serving will become resentful again, and will happen again and again, because the universe operates on a circle. So it's really a pattern within this society that oppression always breeds resentment, and then those who manage to overcome oppression and come into a position of power are fair rulers, but all that only lasts for a time. That only lasts for a time because the new generations already have benefits that have been worked for by the previous fairly appointed ruler. Let's imagine a hypothetical situation, which is something that happens nowadays in modern society. So let's say that you're from the Saturn caste, and then because of your fairness of character, your grace, and your sense of justice and equality, you are elected to a position of power. And you rule fairly during your lifetime. Then you have children. Your children already are born into a position of privilege, so they're already going to be different from you. But let's say that as a Saturnian individual, you raise them well. At least you try to instill some sort of sense of justice in them, despite the privilege that they're born into. And let's say that it sticks. Then you die. Then your kids are going to have their own kids, and their kids are going to have their kids, and all of them are going to be born into a position of privilege. And over time, the original justice and fairness and moral compass of the Saturnian person will be forgotten, and everything will go back to the way it was, and there's going to be someone else among the servants that is discontented. And I think that, honestly, this book really shows it well to us, the inevitability of the natural chain of cause and consequence going on a loop as part of human nature, and all that matters here, all that separates all those eras really is time, the duration of time, and your role within the pyramid, right? When are you born? And that's what your astrology chart determines. You can tell by your chart or the kind of life you're living, right? Like some of us are born Kardashians, and some of us are born in the middle of nowhere in a Chinese village plowing rice for the rest of our lives, right? And this is just the way it is. Which doesn't mean that it won't be any different in the next incarnation, because again, the universe operates on constant spiritual recycling. So I think that this is a very valid conclusion coming from that archetype posited in the book, and to see how two-dimensional, but also repetitive that scheme is in a scale of the universe. But that was very general information regarding all the planets And starting from the next episode, we're going to be more specific about planets on the lunar mansions one by one. We will see how long it takes. Well, thank you so much for tuning in with me if you've stayed till the end. And of course, I invite you to follow my social media and watch the other episodes. I also post a lot of free writing on my Tumblr and Facebook, and free content on my TikTok. You can also book a private reading with me if you want me to look at your chart or help you on your spiritual path. Take care.